Do you ever get stage fright before you play in front of other people? The shaky hands, the unnecessary sweat, maybe a mind blank or two? Hi, I'm Luke from Become a Bassist, and in this lesson, you're going to learn how to fight stage fright and performance anxiety. You'll learn 5 ways to punch it right in the face. Performance anxiety is a very real thing and affects everyone slightly differently. I asked my email subscribers a while ago about it, and they told me a bunch of different things. By far though, the most common symptom was either shaking in the hands or the body, but some people completely freeze up, others find themselves playing way too fast, some have complete mind blanks. Everyone experiences it slightly differently. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I can tell you the things that I've used in the past that have worked for me. So in this video, I want to give you 3 quick mental reframes you can use to deal with these feelings of stress or anxiety so you can start to overcome them and perform at your absolute best. But I'll also give you 2 longer term and slightly unconventional strategies for making sure that in the future, stage fright and performance anxiety is a non-issue for you. The first mental reframe works like this. For a lot of people, one of the biggest fears they have is looking foolish and being embarrassed in front of not only the other musicians, but the audience as well. I once had a student who went through this exact thing. He had been asked to do a gig with a fairly big name artist, a gig that he got through the music program at the university I was teaching at. Now, my student was pretty young at the time, and weeks before the actual gig, he was getting anxious about it. So I asked him, what exactly was he worried about? And he told me he was just nervous about playing with someone famous and in front of an audience. What if something went wrong? So I told him to reframe it in his mind like this. Absolutely everyone you play with and play for, everyone is on your side. They want you to sound as good as possible. Think about it. Do you ever play with someone in public and hope they sound terrible? Do you secretly hope for some reason that this person you're playing with makes a mistake so that you can laugh at them or judge them or something? Or do you ever go to see a band hoping that you'll hate it? I'm guessing not, right? So if you wouldn't do that, what makes you think every other person in the world would do that? The reality is that the overwhelming majority of people don't do this at all. The musicians you're playing with want you to sound amazing because if you sound great, then they're going to sound great too. The audience want you to sound great so that they can have a great time, so you may as well give it to them. Most of the audience, rather than laughing at you, will actually be in awe of you getting up and performing in public. Being nervous to play with others, it's totally understandable. But when you look at it from outside your own point of view, you may find yourself worrying less and less. The second mental reframe goes like this. Play to express, not to impress. A lot of the time, bass players who are really nervous really want to show people what they can do, whether that's other people in the audience or the other musicians on stage. They put this enormous amount of pressure on themselves to be the absolute best bass player in the world. Try something for me though. Imagine 2 different bass players. First, imagine one who really wants to impress the people around them. How will they approach the music? What will they do? They'll probably be nervous to start with, and then when it comes time to play, they'll likely try to do things that are beyond their skills, right? That will probably disrupt the music, so then they'll get really down on themselves, they'll get more nervous, close their ears up, and then they'll try even harder to impress and go for even more tricky ideas and lines, and then it repeats over and over until it becomes incredibly unmusical and it's no fun for anyone on stage or in the audience. Contrast that with a second bass player, one whose goal is to serve the music and express what's inside them through the music. What will they do differently? How will they approach things in a different way? Well, first of all, they'll likely be a lot more calm. They'll play the music with open ears. They won't try and go for the ridiculous fills unless the music calls for it. They'll actually have a great time on stage and be a joy to play with. Now, which kind of bass player would you like to be? Remember, it's not your job to impress anyone. It's your job to express yourself and serve the music. If the music calls for you to just lay down a solid fat bass line, great, do that. If serving the music means the music wants complicated lines with complex harmonic information, great, do that. But the more impressive you try to be, a lot of the time the less impressive you are. And the more expressive you are, the more you will impress by default. The third mental reframe goes like this. Mistakes are a normal, natural part of the process. Here's something you see a lot with less experienced musicians. They'll make a mistake in the first few bars of a song and they'll keep that mistake with them through the rest of the song, maybe even for the rest of the gig. Have you ever done this? You make even a small error and then that's all you can think about. I used to do this all the time. I'd forget a part of a song or mix something up, and then internally I'd be cursing myself. My internal dialogue was something like, "You idiot, how could you mess that up? You know better than that. When are you going to learn to do things right?" Now, does this sound healthy to you? No, it's terrible. I would never talk to any other musician like that. But I used to talk to myself like that. That's messed up. And I didn't even realize I was doing it. It wasn't until I met a trumpet player named Mike Davison that I started to see just how harmful that could be for me, and he gave me an alternative instead. The secret I learned from Mike that I still use to this day is that when I make a mistake, smile. Smile like whatever you played was exactly what you meant to do, even if it wasn't. Play a bad note, smile. Miss an entrance, smile. Momentarily forget a section, smile. Force yourself to have a good time, or at least pretend that you're having a good time. If you smile and get back on the train as quickly as possible, most people in the audience won't even notice anything went wrong. And even if they do suspect something is up, they'll look at you, see you smiling, and think that whatever you did was exactly what you meant to do. But if you're up there fuming at yourself, looking angry and surly, they're going to know you messed up. Plus, you're going to carry that mistake through the rest of the song, and that is not good. Have you noticed that all these mental reframes started with you focusing on yourself? I'm nervous about playing in front of a crowd. I want to impress these people. I don't want to make mistakes. But when you stop focusing on yourself and bring your focus to the music and intentionally having a good time, you might see your stage fright gradually become less and less intense. Now, these reframes can help in the short term, but they aren't exactly complete. So I want to give you 2 longer term strategies that can really help build confidence and help tame performance anxiety. The first strategy comes from an old teacher and mentor of mine named Harry Pickens. Now, he is an incredible musician. He plays piano, and you wouldn't ever guess it from looking at him play, but he used to get really bad performance anxiety. I'm talking legit stage fright. He'd tell stories about not sleeping at all for days before a performance and then vomiting all the way up until the actual gig. You watch him play now though, and it's just pure joy. You wouldn't ever have guessed that he used to be so paralyzed by stage fright. And he taught me about his secret weapon for conquering his own anxiety, his imagination. Now, this might seem strange, but think about it. Most people's imaginations just run wild and free, which can be great for creative people like musicians. However, if you don't focus your mind and your imagination, it can take you to a really dark place that causes more and more stress and anxiety. You start to think about all the things that could potentially go wrong. You imagine making mistakes and people laughing at you, what it would feel like to be completely embarrassed on stage for the whole world to see. See how the imagination can actually be a liability? You either control your mind or it controls you. Now, Harry started to use his imagination in a very different way to most people, and he was very deliberate about it. Instead of imagining all the things that could potentially go wrong, which is what he used to do, he deliberately visualized himself performing at his absolute best, and the level of detail he would get into was astonishing. He'd not only visualize the performance, but imagine the entire day and even weeks leading up to it. What was he doing right before he got on stage? How did he get to the gig? What was he eating the day of the show? What clothes was he wearing? What was the smell in the room? How was he feeling when he woke up that morning? He got incredibly granular in his visualization and rehearsed not only the performance, but everything leading up to it as well. Then, when the day finally came to perform, he had already done everything in his mind thousands of times, so he simply took this mental plan that he knew back to front and he just executed it. You can do the same thing for yourself, and Harry really is the best person to explain it. So I've put a link in the description of this video that'll take you to a workshop that Harry does called Stage Fright to Standing Ovation. The whole thing is probably about an hour long, and it's well worth the watch, but I'll just link directly to the part where he goes over his process for visualizing. It was very eye-opening for me to learn it from him, and I'm sure it'll be the same for you as well. One really important part of the process is that you visualize the place where your performance will be. It's super common for musicians to practice really hard in their practice space, whether they've got a studio set up or just practicing in their bedroom, and they get really good in that space. But when they have to move to somewhere new and play in unfamiliar surroundings, all that practice kind of seems to be forgotten. Actually planning and mentally rehearsing in the space you'll actually be playing can go a long way in making sure that doesn't happen to you. Now here's something interesting. If you already suffer from bad nerves when you play, you'll probably find that just imagining yourself playing on stage in front of people can actually cause these feelings of stress and anxiety. Now this is totally normal and part of the process. Now remember, it's much better to feel these things now when you're at home by yourself and the stakes are super low than putting this off and be crippled when the stakes are higher and very, very real. With this visualization, you're essentially inoculating yourself against stage fright. Do this for even 10 minutes a day, and when you get to your performance, yes, you still might have some nervous energy, but it won't be the same kind of intense anxiety that leaves you sweating, hands shaking, and having mental blanks. You'll be able to function and much better and fight the fright. The second longer term strategy is something I first heard about from the author Tim Ferriss. He describes a process called fear setting. It's kind of like a cousin of goal setting, and it works like this. Imagine as many absolute worst case scenarios you can. In this case, what are your worst nightmares when it comes to your stage fright? An example might be something like you get out on stage, you're sweating buckets, and right before the first song, you just projectile vomit over everyone and everything. Everyone's gear gets ruined, the whole crowd laughs, you get kicked out of the band. That'd be a pretty solid worst case scenario, right? So with fear setting, you ask yourself two things. Number one, how realistic is this scenario? And number two, what can you do to prevent it from happening? In this case, how realistic is it? Well, it is actually possible that you might get nauseous enough to vomit from performance anxiety. But to projectile vomit all over everyone and everything, it's probably much less likely. Would everybody laugh? Probably not. For most people, the default reaction would be something like, I hope they're okay. They actually want to help. So this particular scenario isn't likely to happen, but for this exercise, let's just say it is possible. Then you ask the second question, what could you do to prevent this? Now, if it's legitimately an issue, you could have a dedicated vomit bucket. So if you did need to spew, you wouldn't get it on anyone or everything. You could also practice the visualization strategy to make sure that you don't get that nervous. You can make sure to eat foods that aren't likely to repeat on you when you get up on stage. There are a ton of different things you can do to make sure a true worst case scenario doesn't happen. And by the way, a true worst case scenario is actually very rare. After you've gone through all these terrible catastrophic scenarios and asked yourself the two questions, ask yourself another question. What are you missing out on because of the fear that stage fright brings? For example, if you have this fear of performing and you don't play in public because of it, you're missing out on some of the most rewarding aspects of being a bass player, making music with friends, making new friends, improving as a musician, boosting your self-confidence, your self-esteem, learning new material. These are all things that you could have for the rest of your life, but performance anxiety is getting in the way. Once you know the worst case is actually very manageable and the true cost of stage fright, what you're missing out on, is very high, it becomes a no-brainer to try and train yourself to get past it. That's when you can start using the reframes and the visualization exercise and get really serious about overcoming your stage fright. Now, it's not something that just happens overnight. If you've battled performance anxiety for a while, it'll probably take you to some time to really internalize these concepts, but it is well worth it in the end. Next though, I want to hear from you. Which one of these strategies makes the most sense for you? Which one do you think will have the biggest impact in terms of getting over your own performance anxiety? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Just a quick reminder and a recap. We had the 3 mental reframes. Number 1, the other musicians and audience are on your side and want you to sound as good as possible. Number 2, play to express, not impress. And the third was that mistakes are a normal, natural part of the process. Even the best musicians in the world sometimes make mistakes. And of course, the 2 longer-term strategies you can use were the intense, granular visualization of wherever you're playing next, and of course, the fear-setting exercise. Which one makes the most sense to you? I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you got something out of this video, give it a like and a subscribe to the channel by clicking this button right here. I'm Luke from Become a Bassist, and I'll catch you in another video real soon. Cheers.